Hello, I'm Steve Cassano, State Senator from the 4th District, and I represent Manchester and Glastonbury, Bolton, and Andover. And this is the first of the focus on the 4th. As we've just got back into session, it's now near the end of January. It's a kind of a chaotic process. Literally thousands of bills have been drafted and submitted. And the committees right now are going through the process of reviewing those bills, taking those that need to move forward, sending them to the appropriate committees, drafting language, and so on. So it's an interesting time and a kind of a wild time here in the legislature. And before you know it, in the next 2 weeks, we'll be having hearings. Many of our hearings are going to involve finance, budgets, jobs, the economy, future of Connecticut. And my guest today is Joe Brennan. Joe is the President and Chief Executive Officer of CBIA. Joe, I think you've been 2 months now in your new position, is that right? Just about 2 months.
Been there about 27 years, but about 2 months in the new job.
2 months in the new job. And so I want to talk to Joe a little about Connecticut's economy, our job situation, our economic situation, CBIA's role, working together. That's one of the things that we often talk about, working cross-party lines and working with the public. So there's much that we can talk about. So let me begin, Joe. First of all, tell me, it's been 2 months. What have you found in your first 2 months here at the CBIA?
Well, I'll tell you, I can't tell you around the holidays is a great time to start a new job because I started my new role the day before our holiday party. Then we went right into Christmas and then New Year. So, it was off to a good start, a little low pressure. Things change quickly once the session gets started. But the reception and the support I've gotten from our board of directors and our members and our staff has been great. I'm really excited about it. I think it's a critical time for the business community and for the state of Connecticut. I like the fact that we're back in session now for a full 2-year term. We've got a lot of new legislators, which I think add some new life and new blood to the building. So I'm excited. I think the people of Connecticut are ready to really reach our potential. I've been going around saying that I think Connecticut has enormous economic potential. And I think that we're reaching most of that potential, but we're not quite there. And if we can make some different policy choices in a couple areas, I think we can really do that for the benefit of everybody in Connecticut. So, I'm hopeful to have a good run, and by the time I leave in probably 4 or 5 years, that Connecticut will be a better place than it was when I started.
Great. I'm with you 100%. And, being in the legislature, I'm finding that, every day seems to be a mix of good news and bad news. Over the last couple of years, we've made some major investments that we know that are going to pay off and have paid off, and at the same time, we've seen it fall behind. Let me give you two. Pratt & Whitney's investment I think we spent $400 million in a long-term investment with Pratt. I forgot the numbers with Jackson Laboratories. From a businessman's point of view, from CBA point of view, were those good deals?
I think in both cases, Steve, they were, for different reasons. For Pratt & Whitney, what the state did and what the governor did was pretty creative. This is not just a typical handout where you're giving state taxpayer dollars to a company. What the state allowed Pratt & Whitney and United Technologies to do is use tax credits that they had already accrued in Connecticut, largely because of their research and development expenditures, which reached the billions of dollars. And they moved engineers up from Florida years ago to do R&D here in Connecticut, which is a great thing. But just under our law, they weren't able to use all those different credits. So the legislation that was passed last year allowed them to take those credits against a different tax. And as you said, there's lost revenue for the state there to the tune of $400 million. But the reason that we supported it was not necessarily because of Pratt & Whitney or United Technologies, but there are literally hundreds, as you know, of companies in the supply chain that either make products for engines that Pratt makes, or services the company in some other way. So there's literally thousands of jobs that are impacted by having that large employer here in Connecticut. So keeping Pratt here, the commitment they made, build a new headquarters building and committing to Connecticut, I think was really a big deal. Again, not just for that company, but for the hundreds of companies in the supply chain. And it was a different deal with Jackson Laboratories, and I know that was more controversial in some quarters because it was a large investment where there's a relatively small number of jobs that are created over the short term. But I think long term for Connecticut and being able to really be a center for bioscience and the biopharmaceutical industry really has potential to pay off in a big way. We've been struggling to kind of grow that industry. I was involved with bioscience companies back in the early 90s, trying to give them a foothold, particularly in the New Haven area at the time. And we haven't really grown the industry as much as we would have liked to, but what I hear from people in the industry, that having Jackson Labs in Farmington could really be a game changer and really accelerate the growth of those types of companies. So for a long-term investment, I think that was really a smart move.
Right, and I asked those because those two questions because recent news today, yesterday, I saw indications and reports that we've in fact recovered nearly 90 to 95% of the jobs we lost over the recession. However, you and I know that they're different jobs. Tremendous amount of service jobs which have filed less paying versus the Pratt & Whitney type jobs and so on. How do you reverse that?
Well, I think there's a lot of things we have to do. You know, we started along with some other business groups and groups outside the business community this campaign to improve Connecticut's rankings nationally as far as good places to do business. And unfortunately, a lot of national publications, reputable publications like CNBC, Forbes, and others, put out these publications every year that get widespread distribution that said Connecticut is one of the worst places in the country to do business. Now, we don't agree with that, but we have to do something to attack that perception. So the first thing we can do, I think, is to start to look at the economy in a little different way in Connecticut. Because one of the things I've said to leaders up here for a long time is, in my opinion, the economy is often looked at as a zero-sum game, that if I win, you lose, or if business wins, labor loses, or if labor wins, business loses, instead of how can we really nurture our economy to the benefit of everybody. And I think we can do that if we kind of follow the example that you try to set, which is working with anybody that's got a good idea. It doesn't matter what party they're from. And I don't think the economy should be a Democratic issue or a Republican issue, but it should be just something that we work on together to try to make sure that Connecticut is hospitable to business, because it's not just about helping the business community, it really is about helping everybody in the state. One of the things that troubles me is the demographic problems facing the state of Connecticut. We're the 7th oldest population in the country, and we've had trouble growing our younger population. And in fact, from 2013 to 2014, we lost population, relatively small numbers, on balance about 2,600, but we also had 91,000 people move out of the state of Connecticut. And they didn't all move to Florida. More people moved to New York than any other state. And they moved to New Jersey and Massachusetts and Pennsylvania. So what do we've got to do to keep younger people in Connecticut? Because those good jobs that you would like to have here are going elsewhere. So I think creating a climate that makes companies invest here, want to grow here, and that provides the opportunities for people. So we can talk specifics around tax policy, labor policy, et cetera. But I think just having attitudinal change that says instead of being adversarial with the business community or on economic issues, let's really find a way that we can work to the benefit of everybody.
You mentioned the feeders basically to Pratt & Whitney, the small companies. Over the last 4 years, I've been to at least 80 of them that I know of. Fascinating to go in, workforce of anywhere from maybe 8 to 20 or 30 people. I believe the number that I last heard is there's more than $30 billion in aerospace contracts over the next 10-year period. And to a person, from business to business, the biggest concern I've had expressed to me is they're worried about their aging workforce and we're not feeding people into the system. Is that consistent with what you guys are seeing?
Absolutely. It's not just aerospace. I was saying in a meeting yesterday, no matter what meeting I'm in, and no matter what the topic is, before that meeting is over, you end up talking about workforce. It really goes across the board, from accountants to lawyers to bankers to service people to manufacturers. It almost doesn't matter. Everybody's talking about the concerns over workforce. But I think it's particularly acute in aerospace because of this ramp up that we're expecting to see. in commercial aerospace engine production. And the fact that we did so much, as we talked about earlier, to keep Pratt & Whitney here and that supply chain. But that's the biggest single issue I think all those companies face is as our, you see different numbers on the average age of a machinist, anywhere from 55 to 60 years old. So as those people retire, who's going to be filling those jobs? And it's a complicated issue. There's been, I could talk all day about the different programs at the community colleges, the technical high schools. Catherine Smith from the Department of Economic and Community Development had just put together a group to try to better match up companies that need people with skills with those people that have skills and maybe just aren't getting matched up as quickly as possible. But yeah, you would think when we had, even when we had an unemployment rate of over 8%, we still had companies saying we can't find people. And that's really counterintuitive. You think when you have a high unemployment rate, it's easy to find people, but the key is skills. That's why we've invested so much in our education system in STEM subjects so people can come out with those engineering and math and other backgrounds to help fill those jobs. So unfortunately, I don't think there's any short-term solution. It's more long-term, working with your schools and your training systems. But the problem is we've got a short-term issue as this ramp-up occurs. So I think it's being smart around training your incumbent workers so they have the skills, and then really working with the community colleges I think are key. And I know you've been a big proponent of community colleges and a big supporter of them, but I think they can be key to filling that pipeline, or at least helping to fill that pipeline.
All right, we got to take a break, and then we'll come back. I want to talk a little about the apprenticeship programs that tie in with us. We're back from our commercial break, and again, Joe Brennan, the President and Chief Executive Officer of CBIA, is with us today. We've been talking about jobs in Connecticut and so on. Joe, we've been having many discussions. I know you've been involved with them, with apprentice programs. The definition of apprentice is an issue in itself, but countries around the world starting programs at 7th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade levels, where it seems that sometime 20 or 30 years ago we basically got rid of the shop programs and all of those programs that had, whether it was drafting, mechanical drawing, all the types of things that we don't have anymore. Does it make sense to work and get that back into the system so we can get these programs going?
Well, I think we have to. I think what happened, and I've just seen it in my time with CBIA coming up to the state capitol. I remember when I started back in the late 80s, I'd be testifying on a manufacturing bill, and people would say to me, "Why do you care about manufacturing? Manufacturing is dead in Connecticut." And I think that was the attitude nationally too. We were going to move to a service economy and a knowledge-based economy, and we wouldn't be producing products anymore. And what we found is that never was the case. Manufacturing's always been critical, and it's still very critical, not only to Connecticut, but to the United States. And now we're seeing, what's called reshoring, as companies decide for transportation cost reasons or just-in-time manufacturing, they want to have more of their manufacturing back on our soil here in this country. So as we can retain those jobs and hopefully grow more jobs, having young people, as we just talked about, is critically important. And I think apprenticeship is a great way to do that, because you're getting that hands-on instruction from seasoned people. It can get controversial, as you said, over the definition of apprentices, and some people feel it might be taking jobs away from people that maybe would get a higher salary or things like that. So there's always controversy around apprentices, but we've seen excellent results from that. So I think the more we can do to step up those programs, make it more available to a wider group of young people, because I think as the economy has struggled to come out of the deep recession we saw in 2007 and 2008, and the landscape has really changed in Connecticut. We don't have a lot of the same types of jobs we had before, that I think young people are starting to hopefully look at production as a career choice. You know, we spend a lot of time and effort talking to kids in middle school and high school about manufacturing jobs are completely different than what you think manufacturing jobs are. They're clean jobs. You're using computers, you're using your brain. It's a great future for you. They're stable jobs and higher paying jobs and a lot of service positions. So I think there's real opportunity there. But as we've talked about, it's getting everybody together, figuring out a way that can make it work, and then promoting it among not just young people, but with their parents, guidance counselors in the schools, others, to make them understand that this is a good career choice for them.
Yeah, we're going to be doing in February, in fact, here in the legislature, probably a 3-hour program. The one who coordinated 7 different countries and their internship programs. I ran one at the college where we placed students in a variety of positions. They thought this is what they might want to major in. And the best thing that I ever did for them, there was at least 20%, it was always 19 to 20% who said, basically, thank God I did this. I could never do this the rest of my life.
Right.
And we need to provide those opportunities to people at a young age, and we're not doing a good job of that. I remember when we went into the recession, I believe it was Don Kleppersmith who said, the jobs that we lost are not going to be replaced. That the jobs that we gain will be new, and obviously the focus was on the service industry. I was at a meeting in Boston this weekend with Federal Reserve and the Lincoln Institute, and they were talking about New England and job growth in New England, which has picked up across New England, but clearly Boston, with its construction and so on, has picked up tremendous amounts of jobs and still high-paying jobs. Part of that discussion is we had 2 tax experts. They talked about the tax structure, and Connecticut, clearly, as we know, is as a small businessman. We have a small business. My wife and I just got clipped with the unemployment tax, and I know what that means. What are the major changes that we can do in that tax structure? I mean, you guys lobby here. In fact, I kid you, you're supposed to be the Republican business group and all that kind of stuff. Is that the case? Tell me about it.
Yeah, I mean, we're a nonpartisan organization. We work with both sides of the aisle. As I said earlier, we don't think the economy is a Republican or a Democratic issue. We just try to find the best ideas, and we try to support and work with those people that agree with us. And as you know, some people in this building don't. We spend a lot of time, unfortunately, playing defense here. It goes to what I said earlier about populations shifting. I think some of the things we're trying to do in Connecticut to make this, the perfect job, it's not working. And that's why companies aren't investing here at the rate we would like to see. And people of different ages are going elsewhere to find better opportunities. So I think we have to stop trying to make every job a perfect job and make this a place where people want to invest and grow. On the tax side, some of the things that we've been talking about this year is helping small businesses by allowing them to take some of the same tax credits that larger companies take. Not to get into the weeds too much, but if you're a larger company, we talked earlier about Pratt & Whitney, that's called a C corporation, a traditional corporation. They can take credits off their corporate income tax for different things that the state of Connecticut, through its legislature, encourages them to do, like make R&D investments or other capital purchases. Smaller companies that are so-called pass-through entities are not a C corporation. Might be an LLC or an S corporation or a partnership. They don't get to take those same credits that the larger companies do. So that's a proposal we've been pushing for the last several years. Unfortunately, like everything else, there's a cost to it. And when the state is looking at a potential $1 billion plus deficit, it's difficult to do these things. But that was one idea we had for smaller companies. And then for manufacturers in general, regardless of their size, to allow them to use those same tax credits that we talked about earlier that maybe they've accrued because they've made those investments in Connecticut, but they can't take them off the corporate tax anymore under our laws, but allow them to take it off other taxes like we did with the Pratt & Whitney deal. So those are 2 ideas that I think would really help spur investment, because at the end of the day, you want to see more cranes in the air. As I travel around the country, you see cranes in the air. You mentioned Boston.
Sure, yeah.
There's so much going on there because technology companies want to be there, biotech companies want to be there. There's a lot of building going on. And you go in other parts of the country, you see that. We're not seeing the same investment here. You're not seeing as many cranes in the air as you travel around Connecticut. So we've got to make it easier to invest your dollars here instead of elsewhere. And those are two ideas on the tax side that could help make that happen.
Many of the businesses I've talked to talked about the tax structure, but they said the tax that kills them the most is the property tax. Knowing nationally what businesses are doing nationally, how much of a factor is that?
You know, it's changes over time. It's interesting because when I started at CBIA, it was probably the number one issue. Largely, again, I keep talking about manufacturing because of their importance to the Connecticut economy. But manufacturers in Connecticut would pay a local property tax on all their production machinery. Those big machines that are help making products, they'd pay a property tax on it. Most other states in the region did not tax that at the local level. So that puts you at an immediate competitive disadvantage. And through time now, we've started to exempt a lot of that machinery from the property tax. So it's a little bit less onerous than it was. But on all your historic machinery, you're still paying tax on it. So that definitely is an issue. It really depends on the type of business that you have. Some are hit more than others. And also, as you know, what town you're in and where they are in the reval cycle. Because when that mill rate creeps up in between reval cycles, then your property tax obviously goes up. So yeah, I would say it's not as big an issue as it was 20 years ago, but it's still a big issue. I think totally, if you look around the state, much more money is paid in property taxes than is in corporate taxes or any of the other business taxes.
Sure.
So, but you've also got the other side about providing services at the local level and trying to find that balance. But anything we can do, and it's not just about taxes, what I try to get people to understand up here is that companies don't look at things in a vacuum. You don't look just at your tax costs or just at this, you're looking at your cost of doing business. So anything you can do to lower that cost of doing business overall, or at least moderate it, is a good thing, because we have among the highest in the country healthcare costs, highest in the country energy costs, highest in the country tax costs in certain tax areas. So just the balance of all those things adding up makes it difficult to be competitive. So we really need to make Connecticut's overall climate more competitive, and anything we can do to lower costs, particularly tax costs, helps to do that.
The changing gears, Governor's highest priority, obviously in this term, as we've seen from his announcements, is transportation. I know being with CROG and working with the New England Regional Council, we're working on high speed from Boston to Springfield, which will connect down to New Haven. How much of an impact does that have on business growth?
Well, it's had a lot. There was a study done years ago about, said Connecticut would be an economic cul-de-sac if we didn't do something to open up our transportation networks. There was so much bottleneck. Just as economies expand, a lot of that expansion out of the greater New York City area wasn't coming into Connecticut. It was stopping, it would come in through the border, but it would stop in Stamford or Norwalk. It wasn't coming up to the rest of the state. And I think over the years, that congestion has really caused a problem. So I think transportation overall is a big issue. I talked to her about those national rankings. They rank us really poorly from transportation standpoint because we have an aging infrastructure, as I think we all know. So whether you're talking about the ports or the airports or the roads and bridges or rail, I think these are all important issues. We have to get product materials into a plant and then a product out of the plant. You have to do that efficiently. You got to get your employees into your workforce and out safely and efficiently. So it's a big, big issue. We did create a port authority in this past session for the ports. We've created a couple years ago the Connecticut Airport Authority to try to bring a more entrepreneurial viewpoint to the use of our airports. I know you and I have talked in the past about Bradley International and how we can make that a more economic driver, getting more companies to export and using Bradley. If we can add international flights, that could be a real key economic driver for the area.
Well, we got about a minute and a half left. If we had a magic wand, what are the three things that we could do in this next year that would, offhand, that would really help Connecticut move forward?
Well, you're probably not going to like one. But one I'll say is, some of these proposals that come up every year, I touched on this earlier about trying to create the perfect job by mandating all these different costs onto small businesses in particular, but businesses as a whole, or the state getting into the private sector's business. We want to do, public retirement plans. There's hundreds of plans in the marketplace, but the state thinks it can do better. Those are things that the business community really kind of bristles at because they feel they do a good job. So if we could just for a couple years, just stop with the mandates and the additional costs. I think that would go a long, long way.
Cities
Secondly,
and towns say the same thing.
yeah, I mean, it's an issue, and it's all well-meaning,
Sure.
I'm not demonizing anybody, it's all well-meaning,
Sure.
but it makes it more difficult to keep jobs here. And when you look at surveys, it's, jobs in the economy what people care most. So that, talent, and dealing with the overall cost of doing business.
That sounds, I wish we could talk for another hour.
Have me
'cause
back
there's so
on. I got a
much,
lot more to talk about.
There's a lot to talk about. Listen, thanks very much for coming on. I know that, we've talked a lot about working together. I see bills, I see programs that I know that the business industry needs to be partnering with us at the legislature, and look forward to doing that, and let's make a stronger Connecticut.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to work with you, and I'm also a constituent, and I appreciate all your years of service to the town and the district.
Thanks. Thank you for another version of Focus on the Fourth, and we hope to see you again next time, and hope you've enjoyed this program.